Welcome all to the Charts podcast. The title of today's podcast is The Overlooked Value of Brand in Utilities. Today we're joined by Carolyn Vadino. She is the Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Con Edison. She is a global marketing and communication leader with experience spanning both the public and private sector. Over her career, she has advised C-suites, built integrated campaigns, and shaped brand strategies in industries where customers may not always have a choice, but where trust, culture, and storytelling are critical. Her passion lies in elevating brands through meaningful content and through leadership, and she brings expertise across in executive visibility, internal and external communications, crisis response, and media strategy. In this conversation, we explore the role of brand in regulated utilities and why it matters even when the customer's choice is limited. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We've spoken before and at length about brands in the sector and why they are important, etc. But let's pause on this word brand. The very word brand. People interpret it differently. Some hear marketing, some others think reputation, others trust or resilience in crisis. What does brand mean to you, and why does that distinction matter for the energy industry today?
Yeah, I think brand is really the perception that an individual customer, client might have of your organization before you have the opportunity to tell your story. And if you take a step back, Friedrich, we all have brand. You have a personal brand. And I say to people all of the time, your brand kind of enters the room before you do. And it's not just something that you market. It's the perception of how your services, your goods, your product are valued in the market. And so there's really an opportunity, particularly if you think about the utility industry or the energy services industry, to help our customers and the users of our services, who oftentimes don't think about it because everyone just assumes the power will work, to shape the perception of your organization and the value your organization provides to the customers that use your service before something goes wrong or if something goes well. So I do think a lot of people associate brand with traditional business to consumer marketing products, something you buy or something you purchase, in a retail store. But brand is everything, and it's ubiquitous for every organization, regardless if you're, for-profit, nonprofit, government, private sector, or an individual. Brand is all around us at all times.
No, I like that answer. Thanks for clarifying. If you think from the perspective of Con Edison, from a regulated utility, you say it's for all, but can you be more specific on what role it plays for you? And especially maybe when it comes to the fact that customers can't easily choose their provider.
It's a good question. And maybe it would help if we took a step back and explained who Con Edison is. So Con Edison is an investor-owned utility, and it serves customers in New York City and in Westchester. And we provide power, so via electricity, or services like gas, and in some cases steam. So we have three commodities. But if you actually think about what New York City and the surrounding area mean to New York State's economy, and then New York's economy to the United States, you really think about the fact that there are some real critical customers in the service territory. And Con Edison powers those everyday customers and the folks that travel through New York City every day. So while we have 3.7 million electric customers, that's by meter, if you actually think about who travels through New York City every day, whether it's people who work here, live here, or are visiting, there's 9 million people really in any given day that rely on Con Edison if they're in New York City for the power that we provide. If you're getting into an office, if you're traveling via a subway, the MTA has one of the largest subway systems in the United States, the largest in the United States. We, and other vital transportation networks are in New York are JFK. So if you've traveled to this area via plane, Con Edison helped provide that power as well to keep New York 4-7 city. So if you think about what Con Edison means, not just to the customers who have meters and rely on us every day, whether you're a small business, a homeowner, a renter, or a commercial business, but if you think about the tourists, the business people who travel through New York City, that's quite a bit. And so if you think about the brand from that perspective and the importance and the value of the services and what it takes to be a reliable provider of energy to New York City and Westchester in any given day, I think the value is looked at very differently versus somebody who sends you a utility bill every month.
Thanks for clarifying. Quite a big picture you're painting of your services, and it's important to the area and for the country. So just to follow up on this, so now you explain this from the Con Ed perspective and broadly what brand is, but maybe just personally into yourself. So you spend time in the financial services and with the government. How have those two, financial services and government, shaped the way you view brand in an organization where financial outcomes and stakeholder trust go hand in hand?
It's a good question. I think if you look at communications and marketing and the fundamentals of both of those, regardless of the industry you're in, the core objective is really to communicate your value to your audience. And that could be, communicating. If you're in the government, you might want to be communicating a policy position, to help other governments understand where your government is coming from, or, residents or citizens that are impacted by that policy position. So at the end of the day, you have to understand who your audiences are, what messages are important to those audiences, and how do you communicate to them. So when I started out in the industry more than 25 years ago, social media wasn't a communications tool that was deployed via marketing or communications channels. It was very much driven by earned media and your ability to get your story told through other parties. And as you know, the landscape has changed quite a bit in the past 20 plus years, even in the past 5 years. And so the ability to tell your story and to reach your customers, whether they're consumers or commercial customers, has evolved, and organizations have had to evolve as well. And so I currently work for a utility company in the energy industry, and it's a highly regulated industry. And so there are certain communications we have to, extend to our customers. And then there are stories that we need to tell them to help them understand, something as simple as your bill, which might seem, not that complex on the surface, but people really want to know more information about the value of the services that you're providing. So education is a massive part of what we do every day. And we work with stakeholders from customers to legislators, who also can be our customers, to regulators. People and members of the media can also be our customers. And there's a spectrum of stakeholders that we have to reach. And we have folks that work through traditional marketing channels, whether that's a paid channel. We have folks that reach our customers through owned content, and we've been doing a lot more of that on our social media channels, direct email communication, as well as reaching customers via traditional earned media and paid media. And all of that has to complement each other. And it all starts, in my opinion, with the message. So what is the message that you really need to communicate to your customers? And that might change when you're trying to communicate something like energy efficiency, or you're in the middle of extreme weather, like heat waves we had this summer, and customers might have to take some kind of action. So you might be saying to a customer, we have a heat wave coming. Here are some conservation tips that you could consider to help reduce the use of energy that you're using, which not only lowers your bill, but also can help stabilize the grid. And so that message might pivot a bit in extreme weather, whether it's heat or a storm, and that, you have to have a message that you are articulating to your customers that requires an action. And that also requires trust. And so if you aren't communicating to your customers throughout the life cycle of their experience with your product and only coming to them at certain points, you lack the ability to build trust. And that is the same in financial services or any other vertical where you're trying to sell a service or a product. Financial services is also regulated. But if you step back and think about the customers you're trying to reach there, whether through communications channels or marketing channels, you're ultimately trying to sell them a product or service through the lens of trust. And if I'm looking to buy, for instance, an ETF, which we sold a lot at my last company, there are multiple competitors out there where you can give your money to somebody to buy that product. So ultimately, you have to decide why this product has more value or why it's worth the fee that you're paying for it versus another competitor. And that comes through either, having a good product at the end of the day and providing a good service, but a bit about your brand trust. And, a consumer has to trust if they're going to give you money that they're going to get something of value in return. And so all of these audiences, whether you're in a regulated industry, a nonprofit, a government entity, at the end of the day, have to have confidence that whomever is delivering that message, is somebody that they can trust. And the spectrum of ways in which we've articulated our value and or, the services or products we provide since I've been in the industry have changed quite a bit. And that has opened up more channels and the ability for us to reach our customers and consumers directly.
You mentioned that things have changed in the past 20 years and in the 5 years and even in the last year, if you look at it that way, and talked about the role of communication. And when we were preparing for this, you mentioned something that there's a shift in the perception of how communication should be viewed as a strategic partner. So what does that transformation look like in practice? And to you, what's the most difficult part?
So I think if you look at it from an organizational perspective, there are often times that organizations throughout my career that I've worked with have, really understood marketing and communications as part of its strategic business objective, where, if you bring in the team early, you can drive towards an outcome together, almost a force multiplier in a way. There are some organizations that, particularly earlier on in my career, that didn't quite understand the value of one over the other, because both involve investment from that organization to make communications or marketing more effective. And I think as you've seen the value of things like social media in driving perceptions of brands, more companies, whether it's a for-profit Fortune 500 company or a nonprofit, understand if they don't invest in telling their story, somebody will fill that gap and tell it for them. And working with marketing and communications professionals on the outset, as you're thinking about what is my objective, what is the audience I'm trying to reach, how do we need to reach them, and then bringing those folks in that function along as strategic business partners, the value you get from the end product or the end result, the end campaign, is much more impactful than if you're simply checking a box and saying to a communications professional, hey, let me issue a press release. We've already have this product built. Here's some information. Please go ahead and write that press release for us. So I think it's a shift in how even within organizations, communications and marketing professionals have partnered more with business leaders across enterprises. And you see the value in that come to fruition more holistically when those kind of relationships happen at the onset.
Thanks for sharing that. I wholeheartedly agree with you. And the way you look at this holistically is very healthy. And, we talked about the meaning of brand and the meaning of the word in the beginning. So it's just so much confusion around the word. Is the communication perspective? Is it a marketing? What is it? But if you look at things holistically, irrespective of what you call them, that's important. So thanks for that good answer. In your experience, my next question here on about branding, what is the most misunderstood aspect of brands in the energy sector?
I think that there's just not enough information about the depth of service most energy companies provide or utility companies provide. I've often said to folks, you'll have customers look at their bill and they'll say, well, why am I paying so much on a delivery charge, for instance? And what folks don't understand in the United States, for instance, you have supply charges and delivery on a bill. And even within delivery is where Con Edison makes money. But that is the charge, and that's what it takes to run the entire infrastructure and the ecosystem to deliver that energy that's 9 times more reliable than anywhere else in the United States. So that includes the infrastructure investments Con Edison needs to make, continuously to ensure that the grid is reliable, resilient, and safe, and ready to meet, the electrification and the increased demand as our customers continue to electrify heating and transportation. So load growth is increasing as well. That also includes the customer support. So we have a 24/7 customer support line and, a well-trained team that's ready to respond in an emergency. So we have a very robust emergency response team that deploys ahead of and during extreme weather. I mentioned earlier, there's heat waves that we're seeing more frequently. Storms become frequent as well. It's also becoming colder for longer in the wintertime. And so on a what we call a blue sky day, when everything's running as it intended, we have a robust group of professionals that understand how to manage this grid, which is a very complex, urban, dense environment. And more than 80% of the grid in our service territory is underground. But then if there is an incident where the system is tested, whether because of extreme weather and people are running their air conditioners more, or storms, we have overhead lines, we have crews ready to respond. And we drill all year round to think about what kind of scenarios can impact our service territory, just so that we can continue to provide that power in any condition, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so I think when you are a customer and your light switch flicks on and your power is there, or you see your bill and you say, well, why does my delivery charge seem higher this point in last year? What people tend to not understand is the entirety of the operation that it takes to bring power to them every day, and that charge is covered in that portion of that bill. So I think there's a quite a significant breadth of work that it takes to operate a complex grid in New York, the way that our utility company does that. And that's, like I said, infrastructure projects, clean energy initiatives. We have a lot of energy efficiency programs that we're running for small businesses, for residential customers, for multifamily homeowners. We also have an entire research and development program that we run to bring more value to our customers. So there's a lot that goes into delivering energy anywhere in the United States, but particularly here in New York City. And I think that might be a portion of our business that's least understood.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. When you're explaining this complex picture, bringing energy to someone's home or into the business, so it makes me think. Our charts we've done now 3 years already in the US, 4 years already in the US. Our last one this year, we talked about the problem of the industry as a whole. So it's not just on a company level where we struggle to help people to understand what we stand for. It's also on an industry level. So I guess it got me thinking about that when you were explaining this complex picture. When we were preparing, you also told me that a big portion of Con Edison employees, they are also customers. And how does that influence your thinking on a brand experience, both internally and externally?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Con Edison is headquartered here in New York City, and we are one of the few investor-owned utilities that are headquartered in our service territory. And I think that means we're not just linemen working out in the streets. We're your neighbors. We are the community. So Con Edison invests very deeply in the community where we work and the people that we serve. That means we also hire from the community. So the folks that work at Con Edison, we have 15,000 employees, are a reflection of the customers that we support. And it also means, from a brand and communications perspective, your customers experience your brand internally from how you communicate as an internal workforce, but they're also a reflection of your brand externally. In the utility world, many of the folks that work for Con Edison are the ones that are in the communities every day, in the streets, doing the work. We have regional community affairs folks within corporate affairs more broadly that are also very involved in the regions. So whether you're in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan, Queens, or Westchester, those folks that work in those areas tend to be from those areas. So I think it's an opportunity for us, as I was saying earlier in our podcast, when you have a story to tell, you can either rely on your employee base to create those stories through the various channels that we all have available to us. And that includes internal, and your workforce can become your brand ambassadors as well. And so it's really important when you're communicating clearly, you're communicating consistently across all your channels. And that includes the folks that work for your organization, because they're the ones really doing the work, and they're the ones on the front line in the community. And they could become a really good feedback loop too, to tell you what's going on with customers. How is customer sentiment? You could do surveys, which is a great benchmark to understand how your brand is being perceived. But I think, how are people in the streets reacting to the folks that are doing the work? That's also another gauge, and ensuring that you're tapping that group and understanding what's going on with them, because how are they thinking, how are they working, and what kind of feedback they're getting is really important as well.
Thanks for that great answer. I want to elaborate a little bit more and talk a little bit more about that internal culture. So I have two passions within energy branding. One is, how you look at your brand as a centerpiece in everything, and then it extends outwardly and inwardly, so externally and internally. Same brand. You don't have a specific communication externally versus internally. It's the same brand. So how do you mix employees into the brand? That's one passion of mine. The other one is, how do you treat your brand as a strategic asset that has a commercial value? So we are not going to talk about that for now, the last one, but for that first one, so employer branding, the way you talk about it, it is a part of the internal strategy, but still siloed in many companies. Why do you think that is?
It's a good question. I think because historically they've been seen as two different functions, and some organizations have internal communications reporting in through human resources, and then it becomes more of a reporting channel versus an experience and an engagement channel, or depending on how it's resourced, it could be a bit of both. But I agree with you. I think if you step back, and I always say to the team, there's a pretty robust group of folks in marketing and communications and across corporate affairs more broadly that think about this every day here at Con Edison. And it's, what is the experience that we're trying to create, whether that's in the employee channel, like an employee experience is just an extension of internal communications. And then how does that translate externally? And I think that as consumers, as customers, as users of people's services, we have a brand experience that goes across all channels. And so what do I mean by that, Friedrich? If I'm a Con Ed customer and I see an ad on the subway that says a message, and then I get an email as a customer from, my company that has a little bit of a different message, and then I open up a social media ad because I'm targeted by the ads that we are doing on paid ads, and that message is slightly different, am I getting the best experience to understand the value of the brand? Maybe I'm smart enough as a customer to kind of thread the needle, or maybe I'm inundated with multiple messages from all the brands that I interact with every single day, and I kind of forget what that message consistency is supposed to be and how I'm supposed to feel about that brand. And I don't think that's any different as an internal customer or an internal employee, I should say. If you need to create very, very consistent experiences across all of your marketing and communications channels, if you want to have resonance, if you want people to really understand what your organization does, the impact your organization is having, and if you want to be motivated as an employee, I think Con Edison lights the best city in the world. I know that I'm biased, and I think that it has an incredible mission to bring these commodities to its customers every day to keep a city like New York moving 24/7. And I think the employees that do this work, commodities can be quite deadly. Safety has to be the cornerstone of everything we do. Take this mission very seriously and are very proud of the work that they do every single day. And I love to be able to tell those stories internally and externally at the intersection of the business and ultimately helping Con Edison's business and, move forward. Because at the end of the day, this is, a public company, and we do have business objectives we have to meet. And so I think part of what you asked was a bit about internal and how does that tie together, culture with some of the external needs that we have to be mindful of. And I think they're interchangeable. And you have to think about all of your audiences and reach all of your audiences with consistent, clear messaging and storytelling. Storytelling is now really critical to the foundation of all marketing and communication campaigns. And we knew that early on before social media really exploded, but I think it's come more in focus as people have become more empowered to learn about brands, to make choices. So if you're thinking about the external channels, if you're a for-profit company, and there's a lot of competition, you ultimately need to convince a consumer that they should give you their money, their time, instead of another competitor. For Con Ed, as you and I have talked about, we have pure market saturation. So our marketing and communications tends to tell a different story. It really focuses on value, education, information, to continually build trust.
Fascinating. Thanks for that answer. I have only one last question, and I want to tie a little bit, yourself, your where you've come from, and more branding maybe. So you work both in finance and energy, and those are two sectors that some are conservative and maybe not so sexy. Some would say, or unsexy in terms of branding, but that may be changing, maybe not. What do you think brands in those industries can achieve if they are bold enough to embrace it? Because most of the time they're not bold enough. They are trying to be careful. What do you think they can do if they are bold enough?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think what you touched on is risk profiles. So the risk profile of a heavily regulated utility or a bank or an investment, an asset manager is going to be very different than, a traditional business to consumer retail brand that might be selling shoes or exercise equipment, and who can lean into the capriciousness of that brand maybe a little bit more than a risk averse brand in a highly regulated industry. But I do think there's an opportunity in the middle for both, whether you're in finance or whether you're in utilities or energy, to really hone your storytelling and tell the value and the impact of your brand. And I think I said it before, Con Edison is very mission driven, lights what I think is the most important city in the United States, maybe even the world. And I know that I'm biased, and it has an incredible mission. And I feel completely honored to be part of a team that gets to tell that story every day. I was driving home from an event in Queens on Saturday that Con Edison sponsors, the Queens Night Market, a very integral part of the community where we were. And I'm coming around the BQE, and I just see the Manhattan skylight lit up, and I can't help but feel just a sense of pride knowing that the people that I work with every day have a part in keeping that skyline looking as breathtaking as I find it to be. No matter how long I've lived here, I see it come, rise up from a corner or from where I'm walking, and I'm always in awe of what it takes to keep this city looking as beautiful as it does. And I think that there's opportunity to help people understand that story more deeply and connect. We have steam that we provide to our customers in Manhattan. There's many movies that open with that iconic steam flowing into the city landscape. And that's part of what Con Edison delivers. The hard hats that we have that you see behind me, that Con Ed blue is pretty well known in New York City. That's brand. That's the power of storytelling. Utilities provide a critical service that powers New Yorkers every single day. We have 200,000 small businesses that rely on reliable power. If you own a catering business, for instance, and you lose your power, you could lose your inventory. So reliability really matters, just like it matters if you're, somebody who rides the subway every day or lives on the 26th floor of a high-rise building. You want to know that every day your power is going to be reliable. And I think there's an opportunity to tell that story in a way that isn't boring, that could be a little bit fun, that can show that we power everyday New Yorkers. We work a lot with the small businesses that we partner with, and the impact that we're having to keep New York running 24/7. So I don't think you have to be, a fun consumer brand to have a fun marketing and communications campaign. You just need to use creativity in your own channels and stay true to what your brand is, authentic to the seriousness of it, while also helping people understand how approachable and how human and the people behind the brand that work every day to bring, reliable power, safe gas, and, steam to some of the most iconic buildings in New York, like the Empire State Building.
Now, I do like the passion that you have for your place of work and what you do, and how you bundle that into professional answers. Thanks a lot, Carolyn. I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.